We stand at a pivotal moment in history where technological breakthroughs shape We stand at a pivotal moment in history where technological breakthroughs, shifting global power, and complex economics are converging to reshape the world as we know it. From the rapid rise of artificial intelligence to the reordering of global power structures, the decisions we make today will define the future and leave a legacy for generations to come. To help us navigate this global transformation, we're joined by one of the world's most distinguished economists, Dr. David Forkutz Landau. With decades of experience at the University of Chicago, the International Monetary Fund, and now as Group Chief Economist and Global Head of Research at Deutsche Bank, Dr. Forkutz Landau has guided markets and governments through some of history's most defining moments. His sharp insight into global trends, combined with an ability to foresee emerging opportunities and challenges, makes him a key thought leader for businesses, investors, and policymakers worldwide. Leading today's conversation is Mr. Mohammed Mahfoud Al-Ardi, Chairman of the Muscat Stock Exchange and a visionary force behind Oman's economic transformation. Together, they will explore the forces shaping our world between now and 2030, from the rise of digital intelligence to the emergence of new global dynamics and uncertainties, and the growing influence of the Gulf Cooperation Council. As we kick off the third edition of the MSX Chairman's Dialogues on the Global Economy, a story of historical transformation and global opportunities.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. On behalf of Muscat Stock Exchange, I would like to extend a warm welcome to each one of you to the third edition of MSX Chairman's Dialogue. I would like to take a minute to highlight a few procedural points. Today's session has a translation facility in Arabic. If you wish to tune in, please click on the More icon on your screen, which will take you to interpretation, and you can choose Arabic or English as a language of your choice. Today's event is also being aired live on MSX YouTube channel. I would encourage our viewers to share their questions by typing them in the Q&A box given below, along with their name and designation. We will be taking audience questions towards the latter half of today's virtual session. So, as we reflect on recent years, there has hardly been a time when world order has looked more uncertain. From newsrooms to boardrooms, the question being asked is what's next? Will multilateralism give way to transactional relations? Is this the end of mutually beneficial trade ties? What is the future of long-standing international institutions and realities? Overall, the great unknown has led to anticipation and anxiety. I cannot overstate the fact that an uncertain economic environment is bad for business, more so in an interconnected world wherein a shortage of semiconductor chips in one part of the world can slow down assembly lines across countries. Similarly, a regional strife can choke up international shipping lines, delaying the availability of raw materials and finished products. Another factor which makes certitude desirable is the fact that we live in an area wherein our challenges have become transnational. Combating issues such as climate change, pandemic, security threats, and food sufficiency need international cooperation, making it incumbent on governments, business, and people to work together Ironically, while our problems are becoming global, governments and electorates are increasingly getting insular. The growing economic influence of Asia and the global South find resonance in their demand for a proverbial seat on the table. Shifting power dynamics from a unipower to a multi-power world is leading to friction and a struggle for dominance. Recent events have highlighted the urgent need to contain such aggressive tendencies in favor of rule-based international systems. And finally, technology is emerging as a key determinant of international relations. Technological advances have emerged as the principal agents of social, economic, and political change, drawing the world closer while also driving it. And as the fashionably say in the world of tech, you ain't seen nothing yet. While the world in a state of churn, it is probably an opportunity to build back better. And as the Chinese proverb goes, when the winds of change blow, some people build walls and others build windmills. So on that note, I would like to turn to Dr. David, who will talk to us about these things and other perspectives that he has, and then we will take questions. David, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Allow me to tell you for a moment sort of who we are and how we work, so that the audience understands what we do. So we have about 400 research analysts distributed around the world, China, US, Europe, and Global South, covering fixed income, foreign exchange, and some 50 local markets. And we cover about 1,200 major global companies. And we've got a top-ranked macro team. There are really three strengths here. And one of them is that it's a highly integrated team. We use bottom-up company information to get us insights into the macro. The second big strength is that we are very independent. I, as head of research and chief economist, report directly into the CEO. So we're not subject to any kind of pressure of any kind whatsoever. The third strength is that we do not trust the press and the news services in the major countries anymore. We tend to think there's too much bias. We trust our own analysis and we generate our own data. So those are the sort of three advantages that we have. As you pointed out so correctly, this really is a pivotal time in history. Today, as we're nearing the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, this is a period in history with the most profound and far-reaching economic, cultural, and geopolitical changes that'll affect all of us. I've been doing this analysis work for the last 40 years, and I have not seen a period of such upheaval and such possibilities, I might add. So there are three major changes as we see it. I'll be brief to run through them, and then we can pick it up in the conversation. The first historical development, and the most important one in our mind by a long distance, is the discovery of artificial intelligence. This may surprise some, but to us, that is at the heart of everything that's going on. The learning of by neural networks is the greatest scientific discovery of mankind. From hunter-gatherers to agriculture to printing to the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, we have extended the economic basis and efficiency of our societies. And now we've had machines that have helped us with muscle power and allow us to manufacture scales. But now we have discovered how to make intelligence. We can manufacture intelligence, which has always been a very scarce good. Intelligence has allowed us to move from caves into high rises, from walking into flying in airplanes. Intelligence has been the driver of all progress that we see around us. It's intelligence, not muscle, it's intelligence. And we now learned how to make it. So pretty soon, there will be an abundance of particular kinds of intelligences like we've never known, with a price that will gradually become a lot cheaper. And we're just at the beginning. Everything will change. AI is a layer across everything, like electricity goes through everything where you are. The same AI will touch on every aspect of society, on every machine, everything we do. It will impact the sciences, as it already has, for instance, by solving the protein folding problem. It will help with biotechnology, with vaccines. We need to do fewer clinical trials. It'll discover new and more resilient and stronger materials. It'll help us use less energy. It'll help us solve very practical problems like carbon capture, for instance, and things of that sort, by inventing new sorts of plastics and new other combinations. But as you also pointed out, Mohammed, AI will impact geopolitics. The country that gets tech superiority by moving, for instance, first to artificial general intelligence, or AGI as it's known, something that will be smarter than humans in a lot of domains, if not in all, that country will get to dominate the world of technology, economics, and power, because it will have an artificial intelligence that will become self-correcting, self-generating, and self-improving. And we believe that we are not very far away from that. The results over the last couple of years and in the last 6 months, we believe will take us sort of within 2 to 3 years, we will have gotten that. So major, major upheaval. AI will impact defense and power. We see this in the Ukraine now. Drones have made tanks useless, and drones will make large defense platforms like the F-35 aircraft carriers outdated. We will invent autonomous defense platforms as being the major next tool. I might recommend to your audience here that the book by Kissinger and Eric Schmidt and Huckenlotter on artificial intelligence, the next generation, is a superb summary of those problems in geopolitics. The next steps are easy. The next step is going to be AI agents, where instead of doing it myself, I tell an AI agent, find me the cheapest flight from New York to London, subject to my conditions of my profile, and go and book it and pay for it. And it does that. I don't have to do separate steps anymore. We are less than a year away from those kind of AI agents coming at us. The second historical development beyond the invention of artificial intelligence is the political and societal transformation of the US from the Obama era to the Trump era, which was very definitively reaffirmed with recent Republican sweep of the country. The domestic transition in the US will be driven by what is likely to be a long period of Republican dominance at the federal level, matching what already has happened at the state level. You will remember from Jimmy Carter's disastrous presidency and his loss to Reagan, it took 12 years to get back, for the Democrats to get back. And it will take 12 years this time too, because the previous presidency had made so many mistakes and so misunderstood the electorate in many ways. The failures of progressive liberalism, high inflation, foreign policy disasters, including in this region, is really seen as contributing significantly to the decline of the US. And the electorate understands that more and more now, particularly now with the new administration coming in. So we will be looking at a long period of Republican dominance going forward. Internally, there'll be a lot of cultural changes in the US. There will be a suppression of progressive liberalism. Wokeism in all its extremes is going to disappear, as will the most virulent forms of DEI and ESG. The political far left will become far less significant than it has been in the previous administration. I would say, in fact, it will probably become insignificant. Trump's appointments of the most professionals has been, Trump has appointed a group of fairly first-class professionals, like Howard Lutnick for Commerce Department, Pam Bondi for Attorney General, Mike Waltz, and then, of course, Scott Bessent for Treasury. And when one looks at them, one has to be impressed by what they have done before, by their record. So despite all the clamor in the press about some bad first choices, the bulk of the appointments has been very much in line with what we had hoped for and to some extent expected. The major economic changes are going to be twofold. The first one is deregulation across the board. That's sort of one of his principal aims. And the second one is a much greater role for technology. Not technology's application, but the tech industry, or the leaders in tech industry. You see this with Elon Musk having a major appointment, but many others are now coming to Washington as well. And this in advanced economies, what we have experienced is that they tend to get sclerotic, they tend to get bureaucratic, they tend to develop difficulties in permissioning systems, and it slows down entrepreneurship and innovation and growth. And so the current set of people in Washington, or the one that's coming in January 20th, by making deregulation their first priority, and by letting tech companies play a much bigger role, we feel that this is going to be the area of deregulation, similar to what it was in the 1970s in financial deregulation, that then propelled the US to become a financial power. So deregulation will play a major role, and together with the cheapness of energy, it'll make energy-consuming compute industries such as data centers that are prevalent in the US. That's the place where you want to be, secure, cheap energy. So we expect a concentration of that over there. There'll be more LNG and more oil exports, particularly into Europe, of course. And there'll be a very flexible labor market with less power for unions, which is a great benefit for the US in terms of generating productivity and growth. Our result from doing bottom-up analysis is that we feel that productivity and real GDP growth in the US will average at least 3% over the next 4 years as an average. There will be some years lower, there will be some years above, but as an average. With inflation coming down, as it already has, between 2 and 3%, that also means that with the nominal growth, then adding inflation to real growth of between 5 and 6%, you can have a budget deficit of between 5 and 6% and still not change the ratio of debt to GDP and create instability. So it allows for a lot of options also as far as financing is concerned. You may know, of course, that Scott Bessent, the new Treasury Secretary, has this, what he calls the 3x3 goal: 3% growth, 3% deficits, and 3 million extra barrels of oil per day. Knowing Scott as I do, I believe that he will get there. And he has significant influence within the people around Trump that I believe that he'll be able to implement what has to get done to make this work. An important point to make is all of this, particularly the tech supremacy that we now see emerging in the US and the AI-driven advances, it will create an enormous amount of wealth in the US. Our estimate, again, bottom up, is that the growth of market capitalization, just due to the new wave of tech value creation, will be on the order of 10 to 15 trillion. That is just the market capitalization of new tech firms, application tech firms, between now and 2030 will be 10 to 15 trillion. So this may sound outlandish, but it isn't really. When you go back in history, you find that historically the US has grown at 4% in the 1950s and 1960s when productivity was high and the US was fairly deregulated. So it can work. And we believe that this is very possible that Trump and his administration will be successful in achieving this. And when you think in terms of generational changes in the US goes through these changes. It's not unusual in that Roosevelt had big reforms in the 1930s to move to the left because of unemployment. Then Reagan undid most of this in the 1980s, ushered in a period of deregulation, high growth, with neoconservatives and neoliberals. Then under Obama and Biden, it went the other way again, taking a very leftist view with Obamacare and many other areas, and retreating from international obligations. Now we're going the other way again towards deregulation, high growth in the upcoming Trump administration. So this is not that unusual to look ahead and see that we will probably have 8, maybe 12 years of a fairly reasonably growing country. The external politics are going to change as well, of course. With regard to China, I might just add, the hostility towards China will continue and it will grow. There's a strong national consensus within the US that China is effectively the number one strategic competitor, if not enemy, very much out to dominate a significant part of the world that's currently dominated by the US, and not in line with our thinking in terms of what rights and freedoms people should have, rightly or wrongly. And so China is universally regarded as being a principal strategic competitor. U.S. will exacerbate the tech war. It'll make it even tighter than it is already. And Biden just did that again, and Trump will continue that, given the new appointment at the Commerce Department. And so deterrence and containment will remain the watchwords of the next Trump administration. They will push back hard if China pushes this way. I halfway suspect that ultimate sort of wishful thinking is for regime change, though it's not talked about. But that is how anti-China the current U.S. setup is. At the same time, of course, this comes at a time when China faces major economic problems. There's not enough aggregate demand in the country. And China has supported a technically sophisticated manufacturing industry whose products need to be sold. There's not enough demand for that internationally, so it ends up on global markets, making them, and these are hyper-competitive goods, first-class technology, green products, EVs, batteries. China is now the leader in all of these, making life difficult for the rest of the world, particularly for Europe. With regard to Europe, I might add that Europeans are given to wishful thinking, and they did not see this election coming out the way it did. It came totally unexpected, and they're totally unprepared, both psychologically, mentally, and economically, for a change in administration. We believe that Trump will force a negotiated solution for the Ukraine. It'll force greater financial support for NATO, which is not easy to do for Europeans, given their budget situation, except for Germany. And so we also believe that Trump will enforce tariffs on Europe. The size of them is not clear yet, because Europe, in particular Germany, is a major exporter, an export surplus to the US in cars, for instance, but not only cars, many other areas as well. That does not sit well with the current administration. With regard to the region here, which you, of course, all understand a lot better than I do, but from the Washington perspective, our sense is that the incoming administration will be a strong supporter of Israel. It will put greater pressure on Iran. And the reordering in the region brought about by the recent fall of the Assad regime is largely welcome, as it further weakens Iran. Having been declared responsible for an assassination attempt on Trump when he was candidate was not a very smart move, and I doubt it will be forgotten. So here one can be more confident that there is a significant desire to see a regime change in Iran. Of course, it's not within the gift of the US president to make that happen, but I believe that the pressure will go in that direction. By and large, though, the president himself, or the president-elect himself, and Mike Waltz, the new national security head, definitely get and understand the potential of this region and its strategic importance. There's no question about that, much more so than the current administration or the Obama administration. So that's a big change. And I believe that, having listened to him for a number of occasions, that Trump would like to see a peace agreement and growth and development in the region, because in some ways that would enshrine his place in history as having achieved something that no other president has. So I believe that's where we will be going. The overall policy, the way to see it is globally, is one of America first. That is a big change. And you mentioned in your introduction, Mohammed, this question of multilateralism versus transactionalism. I believe that we are witnessing, or we're almost at the end of a global rules-based system with a lot of reduced support for the IMF, the World Bank, for WTO, reduced support for the United Nations and the various international agencies. Ultimately, we're now back in the world where might is right, and the US has the might. So it will impose tariffs. It will not ask the WTO, maybe impose tariffs, please. It will impose trade restrictions of transfer of technology, restrictions of investment in the US, such as the recent proposed purchase of Pittsburgh, of a steel company by a Japanese, which Trump will also veto. So tariffs will remain the economic weapon of choice. Neither he nor Scott Bessent will want to devalue the dollar. They may talk that way, but that is really not in their interest, and I don't think that is going to happen. Quite the contrary, I believe tariffs will increase the value of the dollar as countries seek to devalue their currencies to be able to keep on exporting to the US. So we will see tariffs on Chinese imports. The big issue there is whether China will lose its most favored nation status. If that went, then all of a sudden tariffs would go up significantly for China, and it would probably be at that point become critical. Mexico and Canada, that's just talk. Tariffs isn't going to happen there. But as I said before, tariffs on Europe are definitely coming. But having said all of that, foreign policy will become, I wouldn't call it transactional, I would call it pragmatic. It'll become much more muscular, results-oriented. Value-based foreign policy is something that is anathema to Trump. So that will disappear. So in some ways, foreign policy will probably become more predictable. I doubt, and it will become safer. I doubt that under the Trump administration, the Houthi would be able to divert more than 1/3 of the global trade, having to go around the Cape. That just wouldn't happen. Trump would simply not allow that to happen. And the US has the ability to stop that. So I believe we would see a safer world because the groups that were emboldened by the Biden administration will feel less emboldened, will feel more threatened, and will not want to tempt the US to see what it can do in case of bad behavior. The region that is losing out in all of this, unfortunately, is my home region, is Europe. Europe is plagued by low growth, based on low productivity. In some ways, Europe is exemplifying what I said earlier, namely of mature economies becoming over-bureaucratized, becoming sort of constricted in its own permissioning rules and its own social structure that they can no longer afford. So this is a real problem. Having said all that, though, the main problem for Europe has been and is that Europe completely has missed the technology or the AI tech revolution. The tech gap between Europe and the US is become insurmountable, very much due to European regulation of tech. The EU AI Act is a devastatingly bad piece of legislation. For an example, it'll be very difficult to buy iPhone 16s in Europe because if they're LLM powered, because the Europeans have requirements for LLMs that Americans don't have, so you can't use it in Europe. So this is going to be a major, major issue, and I believe that it's going to get worse, and it's ultimately going to prevent Europeans from increasing their growth significantly to catch up with the US. It's just not going to happen. At the same time, Europe needs to increase its spending for defense, for environmental issues, and for infrastructure. Yet the fiscal space to do that is very limited, except in Germany. But France, for instance, is already at 110% of debt to GDP. Italy is up there. So it's very difficult for them to make these expenditures without growth. And there is very little growth, and we project it to be very little growth. We project growth in Europe, the potential growth in Europe, to be around 0.5% on average for the next 5 years. That's the same projection as the Bundesbank has and the OECD as well. So it's consensus projection. I do not believe that a liberal, social democratic, market-based economy can be stable politically with a growth rate that is that low. Those economies, in order to meet the social expenditures and to meet the expectations of its electorate and to deal with immigration and whatnot, need to grow at 2% plus, and that is just not on the horizon. So we see electoral uncertainty. You all have seen the French government falling and trying to cobble together now a provisional government. We have seen German election, federal election being moved forward. We have a drift to the right in many countries, Sweden, Hungary, Netherlands, France, and several others. Plus, as I said before, it's going to get worse now because any percentage increase in tariffs the US imposes on China, all it means is that goods get diverted into Europe. So then Europe starts imposing its own taxes, its own tariffs. And so you have something that is just a very bad cycle of economic policy. And in addition, Europe will have the entire US tech establishment against it because of the EU AI Act, which hopefully will get repealed. I believe that it's a big negative for the US for Europe to have tech companies against that. So in summary, then, my overall forecast, before we get to the question, my overall sort of quick forecast is that the AI transformation of the global economy is generational change with consequences that are not entirely foreseeable. It is a highly profitable opportunity for entrepreneurs at all levels. I think that we have seen in the past that when anybody ever says that a small startup cannot compete with the big tech companies, it's completely wrong. I believe that there will be startups that we're seeing now that are going to overtake the existing tech companies or will be bought up in the interim phase. But ultimately, the startup culture and the financing for it and the talent and now the tools, the AI-generated tools to help with the startups and to generate ideas are there. So I look forward to, in those countries that and I see that in the region here now as well, in those countries that foster this and support this, there'll be a lot of success. It's really, for me, that is where I would put all my bets, and the US obviously does, and Europe does not. So I believe, in summarize, all of this is that the US will easily move into the global pole position as the globally dominant military and economic power for maybe as long as a generation. So I don't believe that there is really a multipolar. I mean, there are clearly pockets in the global south. For instance, India is going to remain somewhat independent of the two sides. But ultimately, the US will be the dominant power that will set the rules. And given China's economic difficulties and giving Europe economic difficulties, this is not a challenge to the US. And I say this with a certain amount of regret, coming from Europe and coming from Germany. This is a problem for us of major proportion. And what we worry about is simple. We worry about that when you go back in history, in the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution was successful in Germany and successful, most of all, in the UK. It gave the UK, for instance, the power, the wealth, and the wherewithal to create a massive empire and to dominate everything else, including China. And we see that those countries that gain dominance, it's really only the US, that gain dominance of artificial intelligence and all that comes with it, will similarly move into that position of being dominant for a long time to the detriment of everybody else. So from that point of view, we see Europe falling back into a second tier, neither being a credible military nor economic power, but it has big markets and it's bigger than US in terms of population. So from that point of view, it's not going to disappear. It'll be there, but low growth essentially can only rely on big markets in order to get some bargaining power. As I said, there'll be some success stories in the global south. We believe India will be a success story, such a story, but it's idiosyncratic. Some will make it, some will not make it, depending on how they develop domestically. We also feel, let me finish on a good note, as I said before, we feel that security, global security around the world will improve as there's beginning to be an appreciation that the US is much more prepared to act in a big sense, not get involved in small fights such as what's going on in Syria now, but in big issues vis-a-vis China, when trade is threatened, when its global interests are being threatened. And this success, this safety will spill over into the region here, into elsewhere, and it will provide the foundation for a significant economic advancement. So by and large, it is correct to say there's a lot more uncertainty in the world, but I believe that it's being matched even more with the opportunities that are coming at us. And so by and large, I walk away from all of this feeling rather optimistic. I wish Europe was doing better, and I wish Germany was doing better. But I believe globally, I think we have reason to be optimistic. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take whatever questions you might have.
David, thank you. That was a really thoughtful talk and very valuable insight. There are a lot of questions actually from the audience on exactly the things that you were mentioning. AI is one, Europe, tariff, and the whole effect of the new administration in the US on the global economy. So if we start on the AI, I think there's a lot of questions. So I mean, obviously, like you said, the questions came from, I should mention the names, Saif Al-Hajri, Alvin Thomas, Khalsa Al-Maqbali, Tulia Sharma, Gadman Al-Thor, Dr. Khalid Al-Amri, and basically saying, obviously, this is, as you said, this is one of the most remarkable achievements of our time. But how should countries like Oman prepare for something like this? Prepare for, to leverage on its, obviously best use, but also on what it can do to jobs and losing jobs.
Very insightful question. Let me sort of take that one at a time. So for a small and mid-sized country, it is difficult to compete with the US tech giants, obviously. So to train large foundational models or anything like that is very, very difficult to do, if not impossible. So my emphasis would be sort of twofold. One of them on education, on professional education in technology, in math, in computer science. I would just throw everything I have at that to raise a generation of people that is equipped to handle that. Secondly, I would not dismiss the possibility of creating a set of startups, providing financing, providing the regulatory environment to let young people experiment and start up a company and see where it goes. I think we tend to underestimate or we tend to overestimate the difficulties in doing that. So I think those two things, so education and giving young people an opportunity to learn how to start a company, how to invent something. And thirdly, I might add the mindset of the older generation, you and me. It's important to have a mindset that we think this is important, that AI is a generational innovation that is going to drive us forward in a very, very significant way. If we can impart that into people who are 30 years younger than we are, I believe that we will have achieved a lot in small and mid-sized companies. In countries like Europe, US itself, there'll be significant employment losses. There's no doubt. Our estimate is that more than 2/3 of everybody that is employed will be touched by this in one way or the other. Either it will help him or it will hurt him. And we feel that our estimates, again, bottom-up estimates show that as much as 1/3 of the workforce will become redundant. Let me give you an example close to home. In my own research world, my research department has 400 people in it. I told the CEO that within 2 years, I will be able to produce the same output with half the people. Now, we're not going to dismiss half the people. We're going to redirect them. We're going to train them. We're going to produce better output, more data, and do better. And so it's a question of having a mechanism in place to retrain these people and to give them the wherewithal to make it work. Now, I know that is easier said than done. It's difficult to do. On the other hand, I might also say that I believe that one of the major issues in this regard that I believe the US is going to get wrong is that the wealth that we create, when you think in terms of the 10 to 15 trillion, we simply need to redistribute a part of that to the workforce that's going to get displaced. If we don't do that, we will have a revolution, we will have unrest, we will have a deterioration in our own quality of life. So while I'm very far away from massive redistribution programs, I believe that when you are at the verge of creating that kind of wealth, you need to find a mechanism to compensate the people that are losing their jobs because we move ahead with AI technology and AI manufacturing. So, and I believe that unfortunately that is probably something that the US is not going to get right, and Europe will get that part right. So that's a big challenge in the big countries to do that. It's less of a challenge in the smaller countries because you have a better handle on retraining, a better handle on education than you do in the big countries.
David, thank you. Also, a lot of questions on Europe, but I really want to zoom on your Deutsche Bank is a German bank. What is happening in Germany?
So that is a difficult question for me to answer because I find it very difficult to something positive to say. Germany is in some difficulties. Germany has a low growth rate. It's just skirting near recession. And the potential growth at which it can grow moving forward, as I said earlier, is less than 0.5%. And that's a major problem in terms of funding extensive social programs, funding the integration of immigrants. And Germany needs immigrants because it has a demography that is quite negative, and the median age in the country is rising rapidly. And however, Germany has a real strength, which is in manufacturing, which is world leader because of its small and mid-sized companies that are highly innovative. And so we have been pushing very hard not to try to imitate big American tech companies by creating platform businesses or creating large language model-based businesses and things of that sort, but to effectively take the best there is, apply it to manufacturing, and then create new methods of manufacturing. And I think the one company I might mention as being exemplary in this has been Siemens, the engineering company. Siemens has just been outstanding. And Germany has had some success in that in the specialty chemical industry, for instance, of course, about Covestro being taken over by a company here in the region. And so it is possible to have those successes, but that requires a reform of bureaucracy. It requires a reform to generally make business easier. And we have spent a fair amount of time interacting with government officials and pushing this, and I believe there is some hope, but it's slow, and there are risks going forward that this is not going to be entirely successful. So I think the success of Germany in the last 2 decades or so will be much harder to achieve right now. Now, for us as a bank, we're strongly supportive of what goes on in Germany, but we are a global bank, so we're somewhat insulated from that. We have significant fraction of our top line comes from the US and globally. So that's also when you look at the stock performance of the DAX 40, you see it actually doing quite well. It is because those particular companies tend to get a significant chunk of their revenue from their foreign activities, and that is going to continue. But Germany has a challenge. And as I said, it requires a very significant change to get out of this. Now, here again, we saw a similar challenge around 2000, 2001, 2002, a very inflexible labor market and high unemployment. Then we had the Schröder reforms of Agenda 2010, massive restructuring of social support system, and Germany took off and had 15 years of very high performance. So I could well see that with the proper government that is willing to really make the necessary policy changes, Germany it's in its genes to do really good manufacturing, and it might be able to do that.
Thank you. No, that's good. I have a lot of questions also on how the Gulf region is looked at, and how, from where you sit and your research and you look at the world, how do you look at this part of the world in terms of an investment destination?
Let me just say that I have voted with my feet. I like the region now so well that I'm spending a significant amount of my time here. In fact, I have an apartment not very far from here, and I am genuinely impressed with the progress that I see here. Particularly, I know Abu Dhabi and Dubai best in terms of the region, and I see enormous progress here, both in terms of the attitude towards tech innovation, particularly coming out of Abu Dhabi, the attitude towards attracting financial businesses into Dubai and becoming a major financial hub. So we are very strong believers in that the Gulf countries occupy a strategic role that is making it very, very important. And I think particularly now with a change in the US and perhaps a change in the rest of the Middle East with Syria and Iran, that something very good might emerge from that here. So I think there is a huge potential here. I cannot overemphasize what I see in terms of potential here. I think that a few things are still missing. If I may say, I'm a strong fan of growing a strong university base. I think what's missing in the Gulf region is really good universities and that attract foreign students because they want to study technology here. So one thing that I would do is, if I were an advisor to the region here, I would say, take some money and build strong universities, strong arts and strong other things is important as well. But ultimately, you need strong universities, and they need to be strong enough to attract foreigners to want to study here, because that brings in young leaders. It brings in people that have a perception of the Gulf. Then they go out and remember, that is sort of what the US is doing or has been doing, right? Attracting this massive number of Asian students that come in, then it gets spread around the world, and they start tooting the US as one. So I think from that point of view, at least that's my very personal recommendation, is that go for universities.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Let me ask you a few questions on the future of banks. And so with all this technology and AI and digital assets all over, how do you envision the banking sector transforming over the next decade or so?
I think one has to understand that banks are special in that banks handle risk-free deposits. You can put your money in the bank in a deposit, and you know you're going to get it back in the same nominal value. There are very few instruments where you can do that, and they're highly regulated. So you know that somebody's going to walk off with your money. So I think banks, and that's good, and banks manage the payments and transactions mechanism. So that, and the regulation of it, that gives banks a certain amount of protection from startups that come in to try to take bits and pieces of it. The problem right now is that the regulatory environment in which banks, particularly in Europe, operate has become very, very stringent, makes it very difficult to compete against the American banks, who, particularly going forward now, will face a more relaxed regulatory environment now that Trump is coming in, and the reforms that were suggested earlier and were being gradually being implemented, like the Basel III reforms, that will be much less stringent in the US than in Europe, and that gives a tremendous competitive disadvantage. The competition we worry most about, so it's not fintech, because we can do that ourselves. I don't think that's so much of a problem. We can buy a fintech and bolt it on and make it work. It's the competition from the private markets, from places like Citadel. It's not a bank, or at least most of it is not a bank, and it extending private credit, and that is something that is difficult for us to participate in to the extent that we would like. So I think it's the competition from that group of institutions that now does private transactions, that disintermediates banks. I think that is a very serious threat. And I might just add here, one important challenge we face there is to do with AI, because our ability to use AI tools inside the bank is very restricted because of regulatory constraints. We cannot use AI, for instance, to research somebody's credit history and his credit worthiness. And that's, of course, something that AI would be really good at. If I give an AI program the history of a person and his credit history and his data, I get a very, very good credit scoring device. I can't do that yet. We're not allowed to do that. So here again, places like the big funds like Citadel, Millennium, and so they can use all of that. They have easy access to using all the AI tools that we don't. So that is sort of the second big in addition to private credit, that's sort of the second big item that we worry about, is that we can't quite compete on the AI technology side as we would like. And in some ways, we are perfect for the application of AI because we have lots and lots of labeled historical data. We have lots of data about clients that we could use, and so, but it's very difficult to do that currently.
And what about central banks?
Well, central banks, some of them are experimenting with cryptocurrencies and looking at that very carefully. My view is that central banks are very well positioned, and if anything, their importance and their strength has grown significantly over the last 2 decades, to the point where they have become the major economic institutions in the world from an overall regulatory and power point of view. So, and generally, I would think that the central banks that I deal with, let's say the Fed, the ECB and Bundesbank and the Bank of England and a few others, even the PBOC, they're quite competent. In fact, they're very competent. So I have a lot of faith that central banks are going to get it right. I think there will be an adjustment in the regulatory environment for banks. Sooner or later, central banks don't really want to suppress banking. They like strong banks. They like a strong banking system. So I think it's just a question of realizing that that's where we have to go, and we're going to go there. So central banks have been and will continue to be a little slow on the uptake in their synthetic currencies, and but by and large, I don't see there's a problem or an issue there.
Some of the question about ESG from Ali Al-Balushi and the alignment of ESG principles and AI, and what needs to be done to govern that or to facilitate that in regulations.
Well, ESG and DEI both overshot. I use that word carefully, but that's the right word to use. It went from one extreme to the other. I think most, if not all of us, would like a cleaner environment, would like less emission. But there is a limit to how quickly we can get there without damaging our economies. For instance, in the various EU acts that impose enormous regulatory burdens on that mid-sized companies have great difficulties in managing, is highly detrimental to economic growth, and that's a problem, because if you prevent economies from growing, and you think that's good because there's less emission, you're going to end up with political problems. And so I think there's a fine balance to be had here. Between how strongly we can impose restrictions without destabilizing the politics of it, and we need to sort of agree what is a reasonable level of growth and a reasonable level of emissions that we are allowed to achieve that growth. So I think ESG. I don't like the S and the G very much in that, because I tend to believe that there. For instance, the Supply Chain Act in Europe, it forces third parties in countries over which Germany otherwise, for instance, or Europe otherwise has no direct control, to meet standards that come from Europe. My view is that that's bordering on being sort of economic colonialism, and I don't like that kind of coercion. I would prefer other methods being used, other forms of negotiations and deals and trades. For instance, I think it's perfectly reasonable for Brazil to ask that we compensate them for not burning down its forests. So from that point of view, I think one needs to be a little bit more nuanced with ESG and a little less emphasis on the S and the G and more emphasis on the E. Having said all of that, I do not believe that the environmental problem, the emissions problems, will be solved by restrictions. I think it will be solved by technological progress. It's naive to think that if you understand AI and all the things it can do, from protein folding to AlphaGo and whatnot, that it cannot solve, and it cannot help us solve things like carbon capture, greater efficiency in manufacturing and in our products, and become less energy dependent. And so I think all of that is within technological reach. And so in that sense, I'm a total techno optimist as far as that's concerned.
Thank you. Azza is asking, you mentioned, how things are working for the United States and the US economy. What do you see the risks by being almost the only bright economy without much option for diversification?
Sorry, this is with regard to the US?
This is with regard to global investors investing and only finding the US as the only option. It might,
if one insists on geographic diversification, I mean, one can always do that. But I believe that at this point, I would not be concerned about that. I would be concerned about being underinvested in the US. I think that the US, both US, but US direct investment and US equity investments will do extremely well. I have no concern that there's anything that could go wrong in the US. I mean, when you look at the trajectory, US, Europe, US, China, US, Global South, I mean, there are some spots that I think are very valuable. I think, for instance, in Europe, a very careful examination will reveal that there is real value in some industries. And it's because it has been so downbeaten now. It's so down that obviously there's expertise to be purchased, there's foreign direct investments to be made. And like, for instance, I thought that the acquisition of Covestro was a very good one. This was an excellent company. I know it really well. And I know the CEO really well. I think it's just a great purchase. So I think that there are bits and pieces like that. But when you think in terms of very large amounts, very big positions, then the US is really the only game in town.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. We could be here for 4 hours.
It's very enjoyable.
Thank you. It was really very interesting and insightful. On behalf of MSX, I would like to thank all our viewers for joining us this evening. Thank you and have a very good evening. David, thank you.
Thank you all.